Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us for this hearing on the 30th anniversary of the massacre at Tiananmen Square by the Chinese Communist Party. I'd like to speak first about Huawei. Simple question to get answered from all three of you, starting with Mr. Wolf. Who owns Huawei?
Complex, but obviously it's closely affiliated with the Chinese government, but I don't know the exact legal answer, but I agree with the premise of your question.
Mr. Kennedy?
Officially, on paper, all of their employees own the company, but that has been shown to be quite suspect, and so actually it's not clear. Also, since they're not publicly listed, there's very little required transparency to give you an answer to that question.
And Mr. Nephew?
Senator, I don't have any more independent information than these two.
So the leadership of Huawei, along with Chinese Communist Party officials, often talk about Huawei being employee-owned. It sounds like you would dispute the claim that it's employee-owned as opposed to have, perhaps at most, some kind of employee incentive profit-sharing plan. Mr. Wolf, you nodded your head in a way that doesn't reflect the record.
No, I agree with the basis of what you're asking. That's all I was nodding my head for. So,
Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Nephew, anything to add?
I just say, yeah, its ownership is ambiguous, for sure.
So the holding company of Huawei is 1% owned by its founder and 99% owned by a mysterious trade union committee. Mr. Kennedy, I see you nodding your head. Do you know anything about this trade union committee?
Well, all Chinese companies are supposed to have unions that are associated with the All China Federation of Trade Unions, which are not really bottom-up unions that represent their members. They represent the Chinese state.
So is it fair then to say that the Chinese Communist Party, if it doesn't own Huawei according to Western legal standards, at least controls at a fundamental level the decisions of that company?
Or could give it instructions to do something in the interest of the Chinese government at some point, yes.
I would just say, I mean, I've followed Huawei and interacted with it for a couple decades. And my sense is that at the operational daily level, they walk, talk, and look like a company that makes their own strategic decisions. But given the industry that they're in and how strategically important it is, I would expect a great deal of behind-the-scenes interaction with every side of the Chinese state, central and local.
Mr. Nephew, anything to add?
No, Senator.
I think, Mr. Wolf, it was you in the answer mentioned stock listings. I'd like to, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Kennedy mentioned stock listing. I'd like to turn to stock listings here in the United States. There are several hundred Chinese firms currently trading on the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, and other exchanges, yet they are largely immune from oversight, for instance, from the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board and other common practices in our market-based economy. Should Chinese firms be allowed to trade on our stock exchanges, given that they are largely immune from the kind of Western scrutiny and auditing that American and other Western companies face?
I think ideally I would have required them, when we started giving listings, I would have preferred that to be a precondition, that they were exposed to that. But now that you have several hundred, I don't know if it makes sense to just automatically delist them all until China complies, or if you should have the SEC or others investigate these companies one by one to see if there's someplace that they're not in compliance and have action taken that way, or by their shareholders.
Mr. Wolf, Mr. Nephew, anything to add on that question? Why was it decided to allow opaque Chinese companies to be publicly listed on our stock exchanges?
My sense is that when this decision was done in the late 1990s, there was an effort to get more companies listed on American stock markets and help investors, and there was the expectation that these looked like private companies, and that the transparency of listing would provide outsiders a chance to monitor the companies in a way that they could have confidence that even had they come from China, you could still learn a lot more about them than if they were not listed.
Like so many wishes about China's economy and government from the late 1990s, it turned out not to be true. Thank you, gentlemen.